Rdio was the first, believe it or not, it came to America a year before Spotify. It was the first streaming music service of that kind in the U.S. They never got the size of the catalog up. 7 million, I think, at the end.
Yes.
Whereas Groove Music, Microsoft's, which I think is the biggest still, 30 million. Spotify close to that. They never really got the subscriber base that Spotify or Pandora had. In fact, according to a Hollywood Reporter, they were losing $2 million a month.
Yeah, that's terrifying. I had some friends that worked there, so this is a little personal to me because they didn't hear about it very far in advance.
Yeah.
And so it's been tough to talk to them through this. But, when you have Spotify, which is the independent winning category provider right now, and also you have Apple, Google, and Microsoft all in the space, you have to be so different to survive that I'm not shocked that this happened. I'm disappointed in a lot of ways, but I didn't wake up and go, oh my gosh, I never thought this was going to happen. But the rate of loss was terrifying. The debt is terrifying.
$220 million
$220
in debt. I mean, this is a Chapter 11. This is.
I don't know how they got there. It's impressive. I can't borrow $5 from my friends, but $220 million is all good.
Well, but I think there's a couple of takeaways from this. First of all, this is a tough business to be in. The record industry can squeeze you, and they don't like you, right? I mean, Adele just announced I'm not going to put my album 25 on any streaming service, and you know what? She's going to sell more albums because people will have to buy it, and she's got a big enough base of users that they will. And the record industry decides how much money you make. Also, you're competing against companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, maybe Amazon that don't need to make money in their music services, right? Those are value-added plays for those companies.
It's a platform play. I mean, if you're Apple or Google or Microsoft, you want to provide everything. You want to do apps and music and operating systems and hardware. You want to do the whole vertical stack.
Well, that means to me that Spotify might be next on this list.
I think Spotify will not. It won't die. Either it gets purchased or it IPOs. I mean, Erin, what do you think?
Do we ever have a final user number for Rdio? I mean, was it like insanely small?
It was.
And because I think every person that ever used Rdio tweeted about it nonstop about how superior it was. And I tried it a few times and I could never quite see the benefit of it over Spotify. I mean, the design was a lot nicer. Spotify always, I thought, was faster and sort of worked better. But I don't know that they had a real differentiator to begin with.
Right.
And Spotify has critical mass. They have, I can't remember what the latest is, maybe 40 million, 50 million users and 15 to 20 million.
Spotify 70 million with 20 million paying.
Wait, hold on, Dan.
Okay.
What was Dan saying?
I think Rdio's you're exactly right. They didn't have a differentiator eventually, but they did because they were the first. I mean, eMusic kind of was subscription, and then Rdio was the first in the States. And I remember Spotify a long time ago was nascent, but Rdio was the first in the States. Their differentiator was that, hey, you can do this. You can pay money and stream this music. I mean, Lala kind of did it before the Apple acquisition, but you're right. They weren't differentiated later, but they were initially because they were the only place you could stream or you could pay a subscription.
Why couldn't they capitalize on that, Dan? What held them back?
You would probably know better than I would, but just as a consumer, I think that all of the things we just hit on, which is they didn't iterate, for whatever reason, whether it was management, vision, a ton of different things colliding, I don't know, but they did not iterate. They did not change. I remember speaking to them for a little while and talking about, hey, podcasting, something that could set you apart. And they just had to double down on what their core competencies were. I assume that over time it was because of lack of management, lack of capital, and competition in the marketplace. Really, you guys might know a lot better than I would.
Interestingly, Spotify, Google, Apple, all are incorporating podcasts. I think part of the issue is that the record industry, you're basically based on a business. You're piggybacking on a business that hates you. That is not a good place to be, frankly.
Low margin piggyback.
Yeah, and at any point, the record industry could squeeze you harder.
I mean, this is why Pandora, I think, is in a lot of trouble. I mean, this is the exact argument Pandora has.
One of the reasons one of the ways they squeezed Rdio is by keeping them from going to more than 7 million cuts, right?
There you go.
They just said, no, you can't license that stuff. And why would you sign up for RDO if everybody else has 30 million?
The music industry has to be one of the absolute most backwards things ever. And I keep trying to understand how they're still so bad, and yet they're still just as bad as I thought. So
yeah, I think frankly, Spotify loses more money than RDO, but they might have more runway. But ultimately, this is challenging. Pandora bought the intellectual property and hired some of RDO's employees. They plan to do a streaming service next year, but I think Pandora has complained for years about how hard it is to survive. Spotify doesn't complain, but you got to think they're suffering a little bit. It's going to, I promise you, in 2 or 3 years, it'll be Apple, it'll be Google, it might be Amazon, and it might be Microsoft. I think Microsoft could stay in the business, but they probably won't.
They can afford to do it forever. But Pandora was so desperate to get around some of the royalties that were so punishing, they actually bought a terrestrial radio station, like an actual like WKB4, whatever it was. Dan probably knows. But, I mean, they literally bought that so they could have access to, at least in theory, lower rates for streaming, and they got busted up in court. But, like, they are hell-bent, and that's okay to say on the show.
It just makes me sad because I love Spotify. And I think that these services consumers love. The artists don't seem to, and record labels don't seem to. So I just have a feeling they're not going to be long for this world.
What's unfortunate about... Oh, go ahead.
No. So, Leo, you might have just touched on the reason, and Alex, you as well. Look, the music business, we can say the music business when we're talking in very generic terms, but more than almost any other media business, the music business is not one industry, right? You have the publishers, ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, on the one hand, licensing the music. You have the record labels, which used to sell mechanicals, right? The actual disc or the thing. And now, they've kind of functioned as banks that will roll cash out to artists, but those are all loans. And then you have the artists themselves. So you have all these different competing interests within one industry, and trying to corral those cats is just impossible. I think the other, mediums, movies, television, you've seen a consolidation of the rights interests. And so it's a little easier to do negotiations for that.
Yeah. So are you advocating almost for a vertically integrated record label?
I'm not advocating anything.
No, I think here's what I'll tell you what I'm
Just
advocating. The record labels are a dinosaur. We don't need them anymore. What do? They paid so you could get your record produced. You don't need that anymore.
In advance, you got to pay back.
Yeah, and of course the contracts were always famously horribly in the favor of the company and against the artist.
And they haven't changed them to adapt to the digital world. The ironic thing about all of it is that as a Spotify consumer, or premium subscriber, I now pay $120 a year to music, which is more than the average CD buyer bought in the height of the CD boom.
Right.
Like that's
so there's money going in, but where does it go?
But it's just split across so many more artists now, because I'm, if I buy one CD, I'm going to listen to that a lot, but they don't actually know how often I listen to it, and they don't care at that point. And now it's like, the pie of artists that I listen to is so massive, and they're split into teeny tiny little slivers that they're not seeing that same big $12 or $20 CD chunk that they would get if I bought the album.
Yeah, admittedly, artists are still kind of dream of signing that record deal, but I think artists might have to start thinking about that is a deal with the devil. Yes. And I feel like if you're the opportunity here is to reinvent the music business, for artists to find a new way to reach their audience. I think reaching your audience directly is going to be the key. And I just think that we need to get the middleman out of there, because, frankly, most of the money that comes from Spotify, billions of dollars a year, and Pandora, doesn't go to the artists. It goes to the labels. And if you have a problem with, not making money from Spotify, you probably ought to ask your label. Where's that money going?
It's going to them and not you.
As it always has.
As it always has. But if you look at a label like Strange Music, which is the biggest independent hip-hop label in the world, they run their entire thing top to bottom. They do their own merchandise, their own tours, their own records, their own studio. And so they have this entire
That's
thing
what you have to do.
And they're doing great.
Yeah.
But, name another label that's like that. It's rare to see. And so there's a lot of innovation going on.
There are a lot of individual artists like Jonathan Colton, Humphreys McGee. There are a lot of individuals who are actually bridging the gap to their audience and selling direct to their audience and doing okay. They're not going to be platinum sellers. They're not. Right. And it may be that those days are gone.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's a reality of the music business now, that if you want to be rich and famous, what you want is to be rich and famous. It's not to be, you can make a really great middle-class income by packaging everything yourself, but you're not going to be rich and famous. And,
Yeah, who wants that, though? I mean, no one goes, I'm going to become a musician and take over the world and make
you
80K.
become a musician because you love music and you want to be an artist.
Yeah.
And if you can make, music. You know what, if you're an artist and you can make a living and be middle class, that's good. And that's, I think that's something to celebrate. I think you don't need to be Metallica.